is DEI? John McWhorter is a linguist professor at Columbia University, Ivy League school. He's a black man. Wrote a book called Woke Racism, and he said DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's a religion. It has its superstition that can't be challenged. Then the idea is that there is structural racism, and that is what the entire world, our entire country, is based off of, and it explains all the inequity in our country, the structural racism everywhere. It has its own clergy, the elites, the elect, Robin DiAngelo, Ibram Kendi, Kamala Harris. There's original sin, that's white privilege. You were born with it, and there's nothing you can do about it. This is where there's a lot of ways it deviates from Christianity, but one of its main deviations is there's no redemption. You can never not have white privilege if you're white. The elect, the chosen ones, they ban heretics, blasphemers. They must be punished and canceled if you ever go against the faith in any way. Very interesting book, Woke Racism. It's worth a read. I think it also, just colloquially, can be summed up as the next level of affirmative action, right? Where certain people have been oppressed and marginalized based off of different factors. They must be lifted up. That's the affirmative action part. But the next level is those oppressors, the straight white citizens, men, etc., they need to be taken down at the same time. So why are we talking about it now? Well, the vice president's a DEI hire. And listen, I know this is like controversial to some. People are like, oh, how could you? Trump was at the National Association of Black Journalists the other day, and the ABC News reporter was like, will you tell your supporters to stop saying this is true? It's obviously true. It couldn't be more obvious. How do I know? Because Joe said so. And it's not only the fact that Joe said when he was picking a vice president, I'm going to hire a woman, and then he narrowed it down to black women, and there were like 4 black women that were in the running. And by the way, so he did that, and that's the argument most people give, and okay, that's a good example. And I just want to say too, I'm not saying that Kamala's not qualified to be vice president. That's not my argument here. I'm not saying she's not smart. She's vice president. I'm not. The point is that Biden said he picked her because she checked those race boxes. That's absolutely true. My main evidence that she's a DEI hire is that on May 29th of this year in Philadelphia, Joe Biden said this.
Diversity, equality, inclusion are literally, and that's not kidding, the core strengths of America. That's why I'm proud to have the most diverse administration in history. It taps into the full talents of our country and starts at the top with the vice president.
It was May 29th, just a couple months ago. Joe and DEI and Kamala, Joe said the DEI and Kamala in the same 3 sentences. That reminds me of one of my all-time favorite videos. This is a CIA recruitment video. This was at the peak of the DEI in our, coming on the scene a couple of years ago. So this is the CIA recruitment video. Check this out.
I'm a woman of color. I am a mom. I am a cisgender millennial who's been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I am intersectional, but my existence is not a box-checking exercise. I am a walking declaration, a woman whose inflection does not rise at the end of her sentences, suggesting that a question has been asked. I did not sneak into CIA. My employment was not and is not the result of a fluke or slip through the cracks. I earned my way in, and I earned my way up the ranks of this organization.
Love it.
I am educated, qualified, and competent.
The B-roll, as she says, I'm not a DEI hire, is of her award, the Equal Opportunity Employment Award, and some other DEI award that she won. And here she is saying, I'm not a DEI hire, just beautifully oblivious to the whole thing. Now, it's obvious that Kamala was a DEI hire. You're just not allowed to notice. Here's what CNN says about it.
But let me just say this. That is what we're talking about. There is a way to attack her record on policy without calling her a name. Incompetent is an unflattering name. And when people do that to black women. That is what Van is talking about. You might not agree, but as a black woman, let me tell you how we hear.
Yeah, so that's part of the DEI cult, is if you're not in the oppressed, marginalized group, you're not allowed to question anything that that marginalized person says, ever. Black women in this case it's like a Gnostic cult. They have a higher way of knowing than you could ever understand. The other day, there was the White Women for Kamala Zoom call. This is one of the women, one of the leaders on the call who got to spoke about how you white women are supposed to move forward.
If you find yourself talking over or speaking for BIPOC individuals, or God forbid, correcting them, just take a beat. And instead, we can put our listening ears on.
God forbid you correct a BIPOC person, Black, Indigenous person of color. God forbid. Right? That's the trick of this whole thing. And if you call any of this out, you're going to be hit with the worst word of ours, not a word of ours, not the R word, but all this new talking about a DEI stuff, that's the new N word. Here's a congressman.
This is a right-wing campaign that's going to be racist, misogynistic against the vice president, but we're going to stand on the issues and what really matters. It's the fact that she is qualified. They want to call her a DEI president or DEI candidate. She has more experience than Trump and J.D. Vance combined times a million, right? She worked at the state level. She was the attorney general. She's vice president of the United States. She was a senator representing one of the largest states in the entire country. And so these are just racist dog whistles. Whenever you hear DEI, I want you to think about the N-word. I want you to think about racial slurs. That's what they actually mean.
Yeah. So how does she rise the ranks? Well, you can ask Willie Brown, but she also just checked the right boxes. And this happens all the time. How do you think Elizabeth Warren got her gig at Harvard? Remember Elizabeth Warren? She was Native American, and then Trump called her out, called her Pocahontas, offered Elizabeth Warren $1 million to her favorite charity if she took a DNA test and proved that she was a Native American. And she did, in what at the time was the most ill-advised political decision ever, now dethroned by Joe Biden deciding to debate Trump. But at the time, it was the most ill-advised. And she took the test and then released the results, and she was 1,024th Native American. Can't exactly swing by your local casino and claim profits with that type of heritage. So my point is there's precedent for people lying about their ancestry in order to get ahead in an affirmative action world. It's not like this has never happened before. It happens all the time. Maybe the greatest tweet of all time. It's right in the rankings. It's Ibram X. Kendi, who's the great race hustler of these last few years. His entire scam came crumbling down when he tweeted out a story that said more than a third of white students lied about their race on college applications. Half of those applicants lied about being Native American, like Elizabeth Warren did. And more than 3/4 of those students who lied about their race were accepted. And as soon as he tweeted that, he was called out for putting that up and how it negates everything he says. The entire premise of Ibram X. Kendi is that America is racist and people of color are at a disadvantage. If that's true, then why did so many white people lie about their ancestry to get a step up? So he deleted that tweet right away and has since come back and like, oh, and that was the end of Ibram X. Kendi. People lie all the time about everything. People lie about this stuff all the time. So I just want to say that just to get rid of this like pearl clutching, like, oh no, Kamala would never lie about her heritage or to get ahead. Oh my God. But it's not just Kamala. Everyone will do what it takes to get a leg up, right? It's a competitive world out there. It's hard to get into certain colleges these days. So all I got to do is say, I'm what? Sure, fine, whatever. Check that box. Oops, I checked the wrong box. But DEI has infected everything. It's infected our military. It's infected our airline pilots. It's affected medicine. The greatest DEI story of all time, I think, it's an affirmative action story, but it's all, again, this is just the second iteration of affirmative action. I just got a minute to tell, I'll talk quick. It was back in 1973, there was a super qualified white guy applying for UC, University of California, Davis Med School. And he was rejected when a less qualified black applicant got in. And it went through the courts and all the rest. And that's why in California, we're not allowed to have affirmative action. But before, we were not allowed to have affirmative action in California. A black student was at UC Davis, Patrick Chavis, and he was lifted up as the king of affirmative action. He was on TV shows. Senator Ted Kennedy called him a perfect example of affirmative action. And Senator Kennedy had no idea how right he was. Dr. Chavis went on to be sued for malpractice 21 times. Botched operations, killed patients, left some in permanent pain. One patient he hid in his home for 2 days while she nearly bled to death at his clinic. So that's the very first affirmative action case in California, and it hasn't gotten much better since. This is just the next step of it. And this is where we are right now in our country. And Biden's right. It's gone all the way to the top.